Hello everyone, I recently visited Six Flags Over Georgia for the first time last week, and I wanted to give my overall thoughts on the experience I had in the park. I normally don't write reviews of amusement or theme parks, but I felt the urge to write one after I realized that I've only reviewed individual rides so far. This will be an interesting change of pace for me, as I get to talk more about the overall park experience versus an individual roller coaster. Let's get into it. Six Flags Over Georgia is located in Mableton, Georgia, and opened in 1967. It was the second Six Flags park to open after Six Flags Over Texas opened in 1961. I'd long had my eyes set on this park, as it seemed to have a pretty decent lineup of rides, most of which are quite different from each other. I had long heard that the operations and overall park experience are poor, but that the rides usually make up for it. After visiting, I can confirm that this was my exact experience. I thought the ride operations were a little bit better than I was expecting, but they were still not great. It took at least 5 minutes, most of the time more, for every ride to dispatch from the station, and there was rarely any noticeable issue that would prevent the train from dispatching sooner. This wasn't really that big of a deal to me, but if I'm being fully transparent, which I want to do in my review, almost every other park I've been to dispatches trains much faster. This isn't because Over Georgia's staff is more careful when it comes to ride safety. Kings Island and Dollywood, for example, seem to be able to load rides quickly and efficiently with excellent regard to your safety. Apart from the operations being slow in general, I had two interactions that were especially disappointing. When I rode Dahlonega Mine Train, we boarded the train, then sat around for a good 7 or so minutes in 93-degree heat, waiting to be dispatched. I think if it had been cooler outside, this wouldn't have felt as annoying, but the staff members stood in front of the train talking and hanging out for a very long time before turning and asking me, "Did the gates open yet?" They didn't even know if we were new riders or if we were waiting to get off. No one was paying attention or communicating. Once we told them we were new riders, they got around to securing our restraints and sending us off. I know it's not that big of a deal really, but it just shows that the professionalism is lacking a little bit at this park. The real issue I have is that apparently the pay for ride operators is only about $11.50 an hour. While you may want to direct your frustration at employees in the moment, this explains why they seem to care less overall. That kind of pay is unacceptable in my opinion, but I digress. My next minor issue is that a few ride operators had rude attitudes, but nothing very major happened in that department. I think it was obvious that no one working there was being paid well enough to enjoy it, which really sucks. I want better for this park and its employees. At one point during the day, I came across an employee passed out on the ground, which was just terrifying and awful to see. Me and a couple of other people were able to get medical staff called over and everything seemed to be fine, but yeah, Over Georgia needs to take care of their staff better overall. Nothing is worth passing out on the ground for, especially if you're being paid $11.50 an hour. Another separate, much smaller issue comes in the form of how the ride operators secure your restraints. On pretty much every ride, the restraints were locked down much tighter than they are at other parks I've been to. It was actually painful, especially on Batman the Ride, Twisted Cyclone, and Blue Hawk. I just found it a bit weird that this is a trend across the entire park. I've seen this same observation made in other vlogs about Over Georgia that I've watched in the past, so I guess it's not really just a me thing. Fortunately, I was able to ride almost everything I wanted to ride without much of an issue. I wasn't able to ride Daredevil Dive, Joker Funhouse Coaster, Georgia Gold Rusher, or Superman Ultimate Flight. Superman is a ride I intentionally skipped because I've done a clone of it before and didn't care for it. The other three were down every time I tried to ride them. In fact, I don't think Georgia Gold Rusher was open at all the entire day. This worked out just fine for me because I'm not really a fan of Gerstlauers, especially Eurofighters, and Joker Funhouse Coaster is just a family-friendly ride. Georgia Gold Rusher isn't really a full-length coaster, so that didn't bother me much either. However, if this had been the case with any other rides, I would have been very disappointed. I'm lucky that those were the rides that were down. I hear that the rides at this park go down often, and although a few were delayed or closed throughout the day, I didn't find this to be that big of an issue. Lastly, I also struggled to find water refill stations or working fountains at all, and that's a big no-no. Now that I've gotten the negative feedback out of the way, let's talk about the positives. The rides lineup here is great in my opinion. I think I would have been even more impressed if I'd ridden Daredevil Dive and Joker Funhouse Coaster at the very least. Either way, I didn't ride a single ride I thought was flat out bad. In fact, I think the lineup here may be overlooked a bit. I won't give reviews of each ride that are too in-depth because I already talked about each one a little bit in my vlog, but here are my thoughts. Blue Hawk was definitely my least favorite ride of the day, but I was expecting it to be far worse than it was. It still had a few decently whippy inversions and rode much more smoothly than some of the older Vekomas and Arrows I've been on. I wouldn't mind trying it again. Great American Scream Machine has a great setting by the water. I think that area of the park may actually be my favorite. I went into this one expecting a completely painful, boring mess, but it was actually a decent classic Woody. I thought the airtime was alright in the second half, and there was barely any roughness in the first row. My opinion would probably be different if I'd sat somewhere else, but I lucked out and didn't experience any pain whatsoever on this ride. It wasn't as good as a classic like American Eagle at Great America or the Racer at Kings Island, but it wasn't too bad. Dahlonega Mine Train was also better than I thought, despite being one of my least favorites. It was the least good mine train I've been on so far, but it didn't hurt me like I expected. It wasn't perfectly smooth either, but the potholes were negligible, and the setting was kind of nice. I didn't love it, but I didn't hate it. It's worth riding as a warm-up coaster if you need a break. The Riddler Mindbender wasn't quite as good as I'd hoped, but was a fun classic that I think should stay around. The vertical loops were very forceful, and there were a few small pops of airtime here and there, but apart from that, it basically just meandered around and did nothing. I actually prefer Whizzer at Great America to this ride, which is another Schwarzkopf that's much less intense. Either way, it was built in the terrain nicely and was one of the best rides in the park. Twisted Cyclone completely blew me away. I thought it was going to be a great ride, but I expected it to pale in comparison to other RMCs. Much to my surprise, it was actually one of the best rides I've ever been on. It was also the smoothest ride I've ever been on. Not a single moment of this thing is less than pristine in its movements. The airtime is awesome throughout the entire track, and the inversions are all really fun and graceful. In the back row, it sort of reminded me of Mystic Timbers at Kings Island, but with a more creative layout. It is a bit short, but I was very much impressed. Goliath was about as good as I expected. At first it underwhelmed me slightly, but I got a ride in the back row, and I do think it's again one of the better rides I've been on. My favorite thing about it is the fact that there's no mid-course brake run. All other B&M Hypers I've ridden have a slow second half, but this one does not. The airtime is great all around, and it doesn't track anywhere near as rough as I heard it does. It's a great ride, but I think I need some more rides on it to figure out exactly where I stand. Georgia Scorcher was my first stand-up coaster, and I was intimidated, but I was surprised to see that it's both very smooth and mostly comfortable. The seating arrangement obviously isn't the best. I did feel the seat dig into my balls a little bit, but I was able to move into a better position before the ride got started, and I didn't mind it. It was actually one of the better rides in the park, despite the extremely slow dispatches, which are just due to the restraint system and train design, not the employee's fault. Now for the ride that turned my world upside down. The Batman the Ride clone here is ridiculous. I have a hard time knowing how I feel about it. It seriously impressed me how insanely fast it runs. I've ridden the original at Great America at least a few dozen times, and I love that ride, but this clone rides completely different. It was so intense that I actually lost consciousness for a few seconds, which has never happened to me on a ride. I found it to be overkill personally, but I was still so impressed that I can't not give it its flowers. It's definitely a contender for top 2 or 3 in the park. I also thought that it was, again, one of the smoothest rides I've ever been on. I couldn't even tell the train was attached to a track. So yeah, I think the rides lineup here is actually pretty great, and adding to that, it seems like the rides here are exceptionally well maintained. I didn't ride anything that hurt me except for Blue Hawk, and even that was very minimal pain. The landscaping and setting here are also very beautiful in my opinion. I found the atmosphere to be quite nice overall. This park definitely has a history of having major flaws, but I really had a good time here overall. I've seen a few other vlogs, mainly one by Coaster Dash and one by Coaster Studios, where they both endured much worse issues than I did. I count myself lucky, but I will also say that some of the same issues they experienced years ago still exist today. For one, it seemed like operations were still pretty poor in all the past reviews of this place I've seen. I think if the employee pay was raised and morale was boosted, that would make a world of difference. The rides seem to be running really well, so I don't think that's part of the issue. Over Georgia just needs to foster a better experience for its employees, which will then improve the guest experience. They could stand to add some more water stations and some shaded areas as well, since it does get so hot. I think this park deserves a score of 6 out of 10 for now. I really want to rate it higher based on the rides, but the issues are too big to ignore. Let me know what your thoughts are below. If you liked this video, consider liking and subscribing, as it helps me in my mission to get on more rides and create more content like this. With all that being said, thanks for watching.